This is probably my most exciting video to make in the education series. Now, I'm passionate about all of the processes, but I really enjoy learning about investing. You know, that's why I started our Grand Bash Enterprises LLC. You know, my plan for my own retirement is to invest in real estate. So trying to learn as much as I can about investing, you know, it's just fun and exciting to me. The goal with investing is to hopefully set up financial freedom. And what's more exciting than that? You know, if you can find a way to generate passive income to the level that, you know, it pays all of your bills and you don't have to work your daily job anymore, and you can set up the future for your family in retirement, I mean, I would say that would be the goal and dream of most people. So to hopefully be able to set that up for myself and help others along the way, I mean, I'm just so excited to share this information with you. And, you know, stay tuned to the very end, the very last section. You know, we're going to talk about the 1031 exchange. And if you're already an investor, you already know about investing, you already know about this, you're probably already using this. But if you're new to investing, I mean, that's just going to blow your mind on how that works. So stay tuned to the very end. All right, let's talk about phase one. But quickly before we do that, you know, I just want to introduce myself, just in case you're new to the channel and this is the first video that you've seen. My name is Paul Graham. I'm a real estate agent. I live in Massachusetts. I'm on the border with Rhode Island, so I'm licensed in both of those states. I'm also licensed in Florida, so any questions you have pertaining to those three states, you know, always feel free to reach out to me. Phase number one is believe. Just believe that you can achieve financial freedom. There are so many examples out there of people who have achieved financial freedom through real estate investing. You know, just know that it is possible. And even if you don't fully achieve, you know, financial freedom, but just starting off on this journey, you're going to be in a much better spot, you know, than if you never started it at all. So, you know, I would suggest you read some books. You know, a great book to start off with is Rich Dad, Poor Dad. You know, read that book. It's going to change how you view everything. And then another great book, The 10X Rule by Grant Cardone. Another great book that's going to totally change your way of thinking. And that's what it comes down to. You have to change your mindset. You know, you have to believe that it is possible. So let's dive into the investing information. Phase two, decide on your plan of action. You know, you don't have to plan for the next 20 years, but have a plan of action. And also have a plan for the plan to morph and change over time, you know, as you learn more and different opportunities present themselves. Now, there are many, many options in investing. And in this video, I'm going to talk about one option briefly, and then I'm going to focus the majority of the time on the second option. You know, and you can incorporate, you know, either one of these options, or even options I'm not even going to speak about in this video, you know, as you go along, you know. But I would advise when you're starting off, you know, focus on one option and put all of your focus and attention on learning as much as you can about that option. One option for real estate investing is short-term rentals. You know, Airbnb, Vrbo, things like that. You know, don't just assume, you know, that you have to live in a vacation destination, you know, to utilize a property for short-term rentals, because there are, you know, business professionals, people who travel, things like that, that are looking for alternatives to staying in a hotel room. You know, so just have an open mind when you're looking through properties and deciding whether to turn it into a short-term rental. You know, and the other thing, obviously, that you want to look at that really will catch your eye and catches my eye is, you know, the income that you get from these properties. So if you just had a regular unit that you rented, you know, on a lease for $1,500 a month, let's say, you know, but on a short-term rental, you charge $250 a night, you know, and just 6 nights, you know, you're equaling what you would have got in a whole 30 days on a lease. You know, so obviously there's going to be some extra costs with the short-term rentals. You know, you're going to have much more management involved in, you know, booking it and different things like that. There's going to be more cleaning costs and different things like that because, you know, every time somebody leaves, you got to obviously clean the unit and get it ready. You know, but overall, if you do it right and you hit the right spot and you market it right, short-term rentals, that's a pretty good option. Then the second option is one that I'm going to dive into great detail in this video, and that's investing in the multifamily property. Now, you can certainly incorporate, you know, the same philosophy of short-term rentals, but utilizing a multifamily property, you know, but for the purposes of this video, I'm going to dive into using, a long-term lease strategy for multifamily properties. So that takes us to phase 3. Get started. And sometimes you have to sacrifice a little bit at the beginning, but it'll be worth it at the end. For example, if you're just getting started looking at the multifamily homes, you might want to think about, choosing a home that you're going to actually reside at. Because if you can reside at the home, you qualify, for the first time home buyer programs, even though you're buying, an investment property. So that's a really great deal to get started in. But obviously you got to sacrifice. You're going to be living with other tenants and different things like that. But that's a great option to get started. The key number to know with that is 4 units. So the multifamily property has to be 4 units or less, for you to qualify for these first-time homebuyer programs. So part of your plan with multifamily investing is exponential growth. So if you start off with a duplex, let's say, that's 2 units, you live in one of the units, and let's say you rent out the other unit, and then after you pay the mortgage, the bills, the upkeep on both units, let's just say at the end of the month, let's say you're making $300 a month, in cash flow. So that's not too bad. You're getting $300 a month. So let's say your plan is the second year you're going to buy another duplex. So now you have 2 duplexes, and let's say you're making $300 a month on one, and then $300 on the other one. That's not too bad. That's $600 a month. But then when you think about it, how many years are you going to have to do this, to get to where you want to be? It's going to take you a long time. So that's where you want to really look at exponential growth. So what you really want to do in this plan is if you buy a duplex year 1, year 2, you want to double that. You want to buy a 4-unit multifamily. And then the year after that, you want to jump up to an 8-unit multifamily. And I'm not saying you just have to buy a straight, it can be multiple homes, whatever your plan is. So you want to jump up that way. So you're going to go 2 to 4 to 8, and then the next year plan on having 16 units. However they are, it could be amongst various multifamily properties. And then you go to 32 units, and then you go to 64 units. So, I know you're thinking, you're like, this is crazy. I'm not going to be able to buy a 64-unit apartment. There's all kinds of, examples out there of people who have grown their business, by utilizing these strategies. So the great thing about it is that, you start off with a 2-unit, you start to learn how to be a landlord, you start to learn different things, and then you apply that to when you have 4 units. Now you have a lot more units to worry about, and then you go to 8 units. You're just growing your knowledge base, and you're just learning how to manage, all these different units, one step at a time. You can't just dive in and just go buy a 50-unit apartment building and skip all the steps. I mean, I guess you could do that, but you're not going to really know what you're doing and how to manage 50 units. But if you do it in increments, you're going to learn and you're going to know, and you're going to start to have systems in place, to manage that type of, rental income. So I know you're probably thinking, well, that sounds crazy, how do I go from a duplex to 64 units? But, people have done it. People have done it. And, that's just the fast track, to get the financial freedom, so don't feel like you have to go on that track. And also, this video I'm going to talk mainly about cash flow. So even if you're looking to buy just 1 unit and you're trying to see how to get the most cash flow from 1 unit, the rest of this video is going to be super helpful to you. So we're still on phase 3, but we're going to jump to step 1 of phase 3. Identify potential properties. So what do you look for, when you're trying to identify, investment properties? What do you look for that's going to make one investment a good investment versus a poor investment? So let's dive into that. And one of the things that you need to decide on is if you plan on residing in one of the units in the multifamily property that you invested in. And some of the benefits I already kind of spoke about is that if you plan to reside there, you could qualify for some of the first-time homebuyer programs. So the big key number to look at with that is 4 units. So if you find a multifamily property, with 4 units or less, you could still qualify for first-time homebuyer programs, even though it's an investment property. But if you find a multifamily property that has 5 units or more, that would go into commercial real estate, and the interest rates are much higher. So I would say if you're starting off, try to look at 4 units or lower, especially if you plan, to reside there. If you don't plan to reside there, then it's not going to matter too much. If you have a spouse or significant other, then include them, in the decision. Because, with the first-time homebuyer program, you have to reside at the property, for 1 year before you can move, to the next property. That's part of the program guidelines. So, you definitely want to look at, is this a place that you're going to be happy with, if you're there for a year? And also, sometimes, life throws you a curveball. Your plan might be, hey, I'm going to be here a year, I'm going to buy another property in a year, and another. You don't know what's going to happen. Something could happen. You could end up staying there a little longer than a year. So definitely, you want to include everyone that's going to be affected by it in the decision of where you're going to move. You want to be somewhat happy. Obviously, you don't have to pick the perfect spot because you're just doing this as an investment. But you want to be at least okay with, where you're going to be living. So once you decide on, specific areas that, you're okay living in, now is when you want to hone in on those areas and start searching for the multifamily properties. So the first thing you probably want to do, is reach out to your real estate agent and have them set you up on, the automatic searches where it's going to search all the criteria that you're looking for directly from the MLS system, which is updated up to the minute, and have them send you those emails so you get them as soon as they come out. Especially with investment properties, you want to be on a quick email system. Real estate agents, we can set it up so you get it, 15 minutes, every 15 minutes you can get an email saying, a new property popped up. So if you're really that keen on investing and you're really looking for that first property, you probably want to be one of the first ones to get that email. So things you want to look at is you want to start to look at the things that start to identify cash flow. So one of the first things you probably want to look at is the number of units, because the number of units shows you how many units can generate, rental income. And then you want to look at what those units consist of. How many bedrooms are there? Like 3 bedrooms versus 2 bedrooms. Bathrooms if it's 2 bathrooms or 1 bathroom. Those are the 2 main things that separate income a lot of times, is the number of bedrooms and bathrooms. So that's one of the first things you want to look at. The second thing you want to look at is there a unit available, in this property? Because if you plan on doing first-time home buyer and you have to reside there, you have to make sure that at least 1 unit is available, for you to move into. And then you want to look at what the average rental rates are in the area. So start researching, other properties that are up for rent and just kind of see what they're charging and just kind of gauge the market, based on what you're finding with your results. You can also talk to your real estate agent. They can help you out with trying to identify what the rates are in that area. Some things to consider is that the number of units, doesn't always necessarily mean that it's going to generate better cash flow. You could find a great duplex in a country setting, where that other unit, is going to generate, double the income, double the rental rate of, what maybe one of those units in like a 3-unit multifamily home, in a thickly settled area would generate. So you got to look at the overall rent that's going to be coming into the property. It's just not number of units. That's a great starting point, but there can be more factors, that go along with it. Some things you want to look at too is your investment property going to be in a diverse employment area? Meaning, are there multiple opportunities of employment, or is it just like one big employer that supplies most of the jobs over there, where if that big employer, goes out of business, then, you're going to have a lot of unemployed people in that area. So those are some things that you do want to think about when you're choosing your investment property. And that brings us to step number 2. Research the financials and conduct tours of the property. So once you have your list compiled of potential properties that you're interested in, you can do a couple of things. Reach out to your agent and have them obtain, the financials for that property. And then 2, also have your agent, set up some times that you can go tour the property. So what do you look for when you tour the property? Your main objective when touring the property should be identifying the cash flow in the property. Also, obviously you want to keep in mind, if you plan on residing in the property, you also want to have that in your mind too, is this a property that you're going to be comfortable living in? So how do you determine good cash flow? Well, here's some things to look for while you're touring the property. And it all starts when you first arrive at the property. First off, what's the parking situation look like? Is there off-street parking? What's going to happen in the winter time, if there's a lot of snow on the ground and there's a parking ban? Also, you should be looking at, what's the curb appeal of your property? How does it look, especially compared to the properties that are right next door? Why are renters going to choose your property versus other properties? What do you need to do as far as renovations or repairs, just on the exterior of the property so that you can command, the high end of the market rent? Are you going to need to paint the exterior of the property? Are you going to have to pay to have some landscaping done? And, these are not deal killers, but these are just things that you want to keep in mind, when you're looking at how much to offer for the home. When you walk into the property, you want to look at, are there common areas? How are you going to maintain those common areas? Is there potential, to create some revenue from those common areas? Can you put in coin-operated laundry machines or vending machines? Maybe there's some things that the existing landlord never implemented or didn't even think about. You want to start thinking about ways that you can get more cash flow into this property. Now you start touring, the actual units themselves. How many bedrooms do they have? How many bathrooms? Those two things alone, are going to go a long way in determining the rental rate. What's the condition of the unit? What updates does it need? How are the appliances? Different things like this you want to be looking for. How's the paint on the wall? What can you do to upgrade and update that unit? Whether it's empty or if you're thinking ahead, to when that tenant moves out, what can you do to that unit, to improve what you could ask for in the rate? What is the layout of the unit? Is there anything weird about the layout, that could deter, renters from coming in? Like, do you have to walk through a bedroom to get to the living area? Something like that. So these are all things you want to keep in mind, while you're touring the units. Now you want to tour, and get the physical information on the utilities. Does each unit have its own electrical panel? What's going on with the water? Is it just one water meter, for the entire property? And if so, is there a way to sub-meter it so that each tenant is responsible for the water that they use in their unit? And then you want to look at the heat. How is the property heated? Is it individually by unit? Is it the entire property? Can you change that? Different things like that. Who's paying the heat now? Is the existing landlord? Are the tenants paying the heat? These are all questions you want to ask, and you want to physically look and see how it's set up. The goal with a lot of these questions is that so when you look through the financials, you don't just rely on what the existing landlord had for cash flow. In your mind, you want to start thinking about these other things that you could implement, to increase the cash flow. Like the things we just talked about. If you added coin-operated laundry machines or vending machines, if there was common areas, you could do that too. If you could split the utilities so that each tenant is responsible, for their own costs with the utilities, if it's not already being done like that. Also, what are some of the renovations and upgrades and updates that you could do to the property so that when tenants' leases are up and they move out, how you could increase the rent, by doing those upgrades. So these are all things you want to look at, and you want to have something to compare it to. So touring the property is where you're going to get a lot of this information, compared it to the financials. That is the key to getting a good deal, on an investment property. And the other thing that you want to look at with the financials is you want to start looking at the expense category, and how you can improve upon, the existing landlord's expenses. So let's dive into some of the most common expenses that you're going to come across with the investment property. And some of these you're not going to be able to do a whole lot with, but some of these, as we already talked about, you can definitely, improve upon. So like number one is the mortgage. That's going to be one of your biggest expenses. Then you're going to have the property taxes. Then you're going to get property insurance. Now, this is something that maybe you can improve upon. So when you're looking at an investment property and you're getting really serious about it, make some calls. Talk to local insurance agents. See what you would get for a rate, for property insurance. Maybe that's better than what the existing landlord is getting right now. Utilities, we already talked about. You know, you can split the utilities. We've gone over that already a few times. Landscaping, snow removal, pest management, propane, trash, recycling. Then you have vacancy rent losses. You know, and this just doesn't mean, you know, when the tenant moves out, it's going to be open, you're not going to obtain rent, and that is absolutely true. But you also have to think about some other costs that come along with that. You know, you're going to have to clean the entire unit. You know, and hopefully it's just cosmetic repairs that you're going to have to do. So you're going to have to get the unit, you know, back where you can start showing it again, you know, to potential tenants. You know, and then you have to spend time marketing the property. You have to go and take photographs of the property. And you have to start screening potential tenants. You know, so all these things are going to take time, and they should be accounted for, you know, in your vacancy loss rent, you know, section of your expenses. You know, another line on your expenses, you know, could be property management. You know, at the beginning, you know, you may do the property management task yourself, you know, but if you continue to grow, eventually, you know, you're going to want to look into having, you know, a property manager. And we'll talk about that later on. Another line on the expense column is repairs. You know, so you want to have a monthly budget of what you put aside for repairs. You know, whether you do repairs or you don't do repairs. So obviously when it's time to do repairs, you know, you have money saved up and ready to go so that you can conduct those repairs. And if you're not sure what to calculate for that, you know, I highly recommend Bigger Pockets calculator. They'll actually go in and you type in your information, and they can kind of give you a budget as far as what to use, you know, and put away for repairs. Then you also have to look at, you know, capital expenditures. You know, what is that? What is a capital expenditure? Well, capital expenditure, you know, is when something can't be repaired, you know, it's at to the point where it has to be, you know, completely replaced with something new. So maybe a roof, you know, has to be completely replaced, not just patched up somewhere. You know, or an appliance goes, you have to buy a whole new stove or a whole new water heater or whatever it is. So that's the difference between capital expenditure and repairs. And those should be separate lines on your expenses. And, you know, if you're not too sure how to calculate those, again, Bigger Pockets, go to that website, check out that calculator. They'll actually have a little algorithm that they set up to figure out, you know, what you should put aside, you know, based on your property for those two items. And here's some examples for capital expenditure that you might want to think about. So, like a roof, for example, is going to last about 25 to 30 years. Your water heater, appliances, about 7 to 10 years. Driveway or parking lot, you know, on average every 50 years. HVAC, heat or AC, about 20 years. The flooring, you know, that can change a lot depending on the quality of flooring. You're looking anywhere between 5 to 15 years on flooring. Then you want to look at the plumbing. You know, every 30 years or so, you got to do, you know, a replacement with the plumbing. Then windows, about every 50 years. Paint, about every 10 years. Cabinets and counters, 20 years. And, you know, the structural foundation of the building and the property, you know, like every 75 years. So, you know, these are just, you know, over time studies. This is what they kind of show. Obviously, you know by living your life that things don't always break on these set schedules. So, but this is just so you have an idea, and you want to keep these figures in mind when you're touring the property. You know, like when was the last time this property had the roof, you know, replaced, or, you know, how long has that water heater been here? So you can kind of have somewhat of an idea, you know, of how long these things are going to last. So you can kind of see, you know, if some of these things are going to come up, you know, during your tenure as a landlord. Capital expenditures can totally kill your cash flow if you're not prepared for them. But one thing to notate too with capital expenditures is the more units you have in the property, you know, the more shared capital expenditure, you know, there will be. You also want to research if this property is in a flood zone. And, you know, just because the previous landlord wasn't paying flood insurance, you know, it doesn't mean that when this transaction goes through that it won't pop up, you know, that your property is actually in a flood zone. You know, so check the FEMA map, go to the FEMA website. They have maps and they can show you, you know, talk to your real estate agent, they can run reports, you know, but just make sure, because flood insurance sometimes can be just as much as the property insurance. So be very careful, make sure it's not in a flood zone, or if it is, you know, make sure you're prepared for that expense. And just be wary of, fixer-uppers. Now, fixer-uppers could be great, especially on your first multifamily, because that's where you can really get the ball rolling. If you can really turn something around and get a very positive increase in value. But also you want to be careful, because just because you spend $50,000 upgrading a property doesn't mean the value in that property is going to go up $50,000. The value in the property, it's all based on comparable properties. We're going to look at what other comparable properties have been sold for, and also what the income generated from those properties. There's a whole formula that figures out the cap rate for the income generated, and that's how they kind of compare investment properties. I'm not going to get into that in this video. If you want to know about that, reach out to me. I'll go over that formula with you. But that's just something to keep in mind. So what you want to do is you want to get all these expense categories, and you want to get them to like on a monthly line item budget. So, you want to take all your mortgage, your property taxes, your vacancy losses, the repairs, all these different things, and if it's an annual cost, you want to divide by 12. You want to get everything on a monthly, expense. And then you want to do the same for the income. So you get everything on a monthly budget for the income, and then you can kind of determine, what the cash flow of the property, is going to be on a monthly budget. And if you're not sure, like I said, on some of the ones, how to calculate, go to that Bigger Pockets website, use their calculator, and that'll help you out, with the capital expenditures, and the repairs, things like that. Now on to step number 3. So now that you've, found the right property, you've conducted the tour, you've researched the financials, you feel like this is going to be a good investment. Now it's time for step number 3. Go get the property. So I'm not going to get into the whole home buying process. I mean, I have a whole video of that, called the home buying process and tips video in the education series. So go watch that if you want to see step by step how this process works. But just a couple things I want to point out, as related to multifamily investing is, one is that when you tour the property, you're going to kind of get a feel, for how the landlord, where they were at, where the head was at, as far as were they keeping up on the property, how many repairs you have to do, were they thinking about all the different things that you could generate income from, was that landlord burnt out? You can kind of get a feel for that through the property tours. So, use that information. Use it for your negotiating. Maybe you can get a little bit better deal, if that landlord is just done with this property and just wants to get out of there. So, the other thing I want to talk about with investments, especially if you really, you really grow and you want to do the exponential growth and you start looking at these much larger properties with a lot more units, is that you don't have to traditionally just go to the bank and get a loan. So, you can use creative financing. You can look for different business partners, different things like that, that may want to invest with you. And, I kind of dive into that. If you go to my grandbashenterprises.com website, dive into that. I also have a video about that LLC that I have right here on YouTube, so you can check that video out too. So that'll give you some information, or just reach out to me, and I can give you some ideas as far as, you don't have to always go traditionally through the bank to get financing. And step number 4, once you have the property, start implementing the plan that you envisioned. Start with the outside of the building, start with the curb appeal. Maybe you need to paint the entire exterior of the building. Then look at the common areas. Maybe you need to, renovate some of the common areas, and maybe start putting in, some of the vending machines or different things we talked about. Then as the tenants move out, one at a time, go inside the unit, renovate the unit, update it, and maybe you can go, maybe you're getting $800 a month before, but you research the market rate for rent, if you have a nice unit, maybe it's $1,200. So, as tenants move out, you go up to $1,200 once you renovate them. So now you're going from $800 to $1,200. Work down those expenses like we talked about. Maybe you can get better deals with different things like, landscaping or whatever vendors you're going to be using. And, now you see your income coming up, your expenses going down, and now you're going to have increased cash flow. And now on to the last portion of the video. I'm just going to leave you with 3 tips, And some of these tips, they just kind of blew my mind away, when I learned about them. So let's get started on it. All right, tip number 1, understanding leverage. So let's say, for example, you have $100,000 that you can invest. And you talk to some people and you say, hey, this stock sounds good. I'm going to put $100,000 into this stock. So now a month goes by and your financial advisor calls you, says, hey, I got great news. Your investment grew by 10%. So you're thinking, great. Put $100,000 in, 10%. I just made 10 grand. That's pretty good. So now let's look at scenario number 2. You have that $100,000. Looking for a place to invest. You find a $500,000 property. So you use that as your 20% down, and you go buy $500,000 property. Month goes by, your financial advisor calls you up, says, hey, great news. Your investment grew by 10%. And you think, great, just made $10,000. What a deal. And then your financial advisor says, oh, no. Your investment property grew by 10%. Meaning your property is now valued, instead of $500,000, it's valued at $550,000. So your fortune just grew by $50,000. So that's where leverage, starts to play a factor in investing. Another way to look at leverage is this. So let's say you go to the bank, you take out a loan, and you purchase a $800,000 car wash business. So, after going through all the expenses and the mortgage payment, that car wash business is going to cost you $5,000 a month. Okay? But all the income generated from the car wash business, let's say, is $7,000 a month. So, every month you're going to go to the car wash business and you're going to pick up a check for $7,000. You're going to pay off the $5,000 you have in expenses and you're left with $2,000. So that is what we call positive leverage. So what you just did is you just, utilized the bank in the use of this $800,000 business to generate $2,000 every month of positive cash flow. So, your down payment, obviously you didn't have to spend $800,000, but you're using this $800,000 entity to generate the cash flow. You're using leverage. That's what leverage is all about. And that, in this world, that's how the rich get richer, because you can just put that on a big scale where you're only using this amount of money to have access to this amount of property or revenue streaming, whatever it is, business, to gain this much money. So the money you started with, you could never have gained, your initial down payment, you would have never have gained the $2,000 a month by your initial, but because you're using this entity to do it, now you're able, to use that as leverage. All right, tip number 2. And make sure you stay tuned for tip number 3, because I saved the best one for the last one. But tip number 2 is going to be tied into multifamily investing. So, should you invest local or long distance? Sometimes long distance is better in some aspects, because A, it's going to force you to hire a property manager. And a property manager is going to be very useful because they're going to do a lot of the tasks that were taking a lot of your time. They're going to find tenants. They're going to screen tenants. They're going to be in charge of figuring out the repairs. Instead of you having to try to find somebody or, utilize that person that you met somewhere in life that you have their number in your phone. The property manager, they're going to go and they're going to interview multiple contractors, and go with the right one, that's going to do the best job. And also, things are going to get repaired, properly all the time. You're going to be using, professional services to conduct your repairs. And having a property manager is going to help you create systems that you can have in place, because eventually, if you grow large enough, you're going to need one anyway. You're not going to be able to manage all the units. So, having a property manager, that can do the accounting and the signing of the leases and different things like that, and just streamline all these services for you, is going to be very beneficial to you. And as far as the fee goes, property managers, they're probably going to cost you about 8 to 10% of, the normal rate. And then also some extras that you got to think about too, is when they have to find a new tenant, they're typically going to charge, a half or a full month's rent, on top of that 8 to 10%. So when you're trying to figure out for budget purposes, maybe just add 1 extra percent to what they're getting, to cover, those months where they have to find a new tenant and the fee that they get for signing a new lease. And one thing I should mention about property managers is, even if you're going to do those tasks yourself, you still want to have on your budget line, an expense for property managers, even if you're just paying that for yourself, because that way down the road, if you do want to add a property manager, it's already accounted for when you're doing your expenses. So you already know in your cash flow what it's going to be. So some things to think about if you're local is that, you're going to be tempted to do some of the repairs yourself. You're going to think, well, why should I pay somebody when I could just go in the house and I could just fix it myself? But what you got to start to think about, especially if you want to do this on a bigger scale, is your time is money. That's where a property manager really comes into play, because that's why you should even pay yourself, like I was saying, when you do the expenses, because your time is worth money. But you got to think, like, you could be researching the next deal and spending your time trying to find the next deal. Instead, you're spending your time, fixing a toilet. So those are just some things you want to think about. Also then, if you're doing it yourself, you're going to be dealing with the contractors directly. You're going to have to go collect the rent yourself. Different things like that. A lot of things that are going to take away, from you looking for that next investment opportunity. And I'm not saying not to be your own landlord. That's totally fine if you, can handle all these things and you have the time to do all these things. But it's just something I just want to say, just consider about, that your time is valuable. So just make sure that you're spending it, on the right items that are going to set you up for success, in the best possible way. And if you do hire a property manager, stay involved, because, keep up on them, because they might not be doing as great a job as you might be thinking they're doing. So, just because you do have a property manager, don't just walk away and think, they're going to handle everything. Stay involved. Make sure that they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. If you invest locally, one really positive benefit is that you may know the market a lot better, just because, you've lived in that area, and you know a lot about that area. But, on the flip side, if you look long distance investing, you can actually broaden your search a little more, and look into more different options for investing. Do you want to get to financial freedom faster? Look for properties that are going to generate, a higher cash flow. You're going to have more options when you open up, your search. And one thing I wanted to mention is that we've been looking at, just improving the cash flow, like right away. Like, here's the things you can do. Let's improve the cash flow. But we haven't really discussed appreciation. So that's something that you can look at when you're looking at long distance investing, is you can research markets, where the appreciation of the homes grows at a higher rate. So for example, you buy a home today in 2023, what's that going to be worth, in 2053? So like certain areas of the country, typically grow at a higher rate. So if you're going to hold on to the investment long term and try to create long-term wealth, that's an option you might want to think about also. And typically, the markets that are like, high rate markets like New York City, Boston, places like that, typically now those are the ones that appreciate the highest. But that's not always the case, and you can't always go by the past. Sometimes the market switches. So, it's not an exact science, but there is data out there that you can research and try to find the higher appreciation rates. All right, here it is, tip number 3 of the day. This is a tip that just blew my mind away when I first learned about it. If you're already an investor, you've heard about this and you're probably using this. But if this is your first time, you're just learning about investing, here it is. It's called the 1031 exchange. So, let's go back to that example, that we talked about previously, where you had a $100,000 investment and you ended up purchasing a property for $500,000. So, now it's time. We're going to put all the pieces of the puzzle together and just kind of see how it all works. So, you know, you have that property, you did all the steps, you toured the property, you know, you figured out ways to improve the cash flow, you know, you threw laundry machines in the common areas, you fixed up the curb appeal, you renovated the units, you know, so now that $500,000 property is now worth $800,000. So you did a great job, you know, so now it's time to sell the property. So here's where the problem comes in. So now, you know, the IRS, the government, they come knocking, knock, knock, knock. They're going to want, you know, their share of your profits. You have to pay taxes on that. You know, it's called the capital gains tax. And there's two types of capital gains taxes. There's short-term capital gains tax, and then there's long-term capital gains tax. So the short-term capital gains tax is just if you own that property 1 year or less. And if you owned it over a year, that would be long-term capital gains tax. So, you know, either way, however you learn the property, you're going to have to pay capital gains tax. Unless you complete a 1031 exchange. And that's what I'll get into right now. So the 1031 exchange, you know, was introduced back in 1921. And it's still on the book with the IRS tax codes. Still being utilized, and hopefully it always stays being utilized, because this is a great tool to use. So let's go back. You have your home, you want to sell it, you don't want to have to pay the capital gains tax. So here's what you could do. So now you have that property, it's now worth $800,000. Now what you can do, you know, is you can complete a 1031 exchange. So now you can sell that property for the $800,000, and as long as you reinvest that $800,000 into like or similar properties, which just pretty much means another investment property, you can defer that capital gains tax and not have to pay it right now. In fact, you don't even have to just buy one property. So if you can't just find a great property for $800,000, you know, you could buy two $400,000 properties. So as long as you're spending the $800,000, you're going to be good. You can do that up to 3 different properties. So now let's say you do that. You do a 1031 exchange, you purchase two $400,000 properties, and let's say you do the same process. You know, you increase the cash flow, increase the value of the property, do renovations, whatever it is. And let's say you made each of those $400,000 properties now worth $800,000 each. Let's say you doubled, you know, what their value is. So now you have two $800,000 properties. So you have essentially $1,600,000 worth of investment properties. And now you want to sell those. Now you say, look, now I've made enough. Now I want to go buy that one big apartment building with a lot of units. But, you know, now I owe the capital gains tax again. You know, I'm in the same situation. So, and I deferred it from the last time. So what can I do? Well, here's what you can do. You can do another 1031 exchange. So now you can do the same thing. So now you have $1,600,000 worth of investments. As long as you go buy another like property, like I said, you go buy another investment property, $1,600,000. As long as you do that, now you can defer the capital gains tax. Well, what happens to the previous capital gains tax you deferred the first time? That just keeps rolling along too. So you could just keep deferring these capital gains taxes. So here's where it really gets mind-blowing. So now you did all this. Let's say you did it. Now you have a big apartment building that you just bought for $1,600,000. Now you are collecting rents from this big apartment building, which is going to be a very big cash flow that you're going to be getting every month. And think about it. It all started with your $100,000 loan that you originally started, you know, any money that you paid on renovations or whatever, plus that. But you started with that investment, and now you're collecting cash flow from a $1,600,000 apartment complex. Now you can keep doing this over and over and over again until when? Until you eventually, unfortunately, die. You know, you can keep doing it over and over again until then. And then what happens? Well, now your heirs, they inherit your property. And here's the beautiful thing. That 1031 exchange, all that taxes that you never paid, that's all forgiven by the IRS. You know, your heirs are not responsible to pay, you know, any of those taxes. Now, what's the catch? Well, there is a catch, kind of. So, you know, if you ever decide that, you know, after doing this several times, that, you know what, I'm just going to cash out, you know, sell all the properties. Well, at that time, now you are going to be liable for all those taxes you kept deferring over the years. And the other thing that you need to look at is there are very strict time limits with these transactions during the 1031 exchange. And let me get into that. So, first off, you have to identify your next property within 45 days after you sold your property. So you have 45 days to identify the next property. And then you have 180 days to complete the sale. So from the day you close on selling your property, you have 180 days to completely close the sale on the next property. You know, and those are very strict guidelines. So you can't, there's no extensions. You have to abide by those guidelines or you're going to be liable for the capital gains tax. So how does this whole process work? Well, you have to use a qualified intermediary. So what happens is you're going to sell your property and then the funds are going to go to the intermediary and they're going to hold on to those funds and they're going to coordinate those funds and they're going to transfer those funds, you know, when you close on the new property. So in essence, you know, you never physically touch any of the money. You know, you sell the property, it goes to the intermediary and they hold on to it and they coordinate it and they transfer it. So, you know, in essence, you never had the money. So that's kind of how it works as far as, you know, you're never going to actually have to pay, you know, the gains tax on it. I could talk about investment tips all day. This video is probably already super long as it is. So I'm going to cut it off right now. And, you know, I'll just do additional videos on more investment tips and different things. But this is just something that I'm very passionate about, very interested in. You know, I love to see, you know, how can I turn $10 into $1,000. That's something that very much interests me. And, you know, I just like to share that information along to you. So, you know, just thank you. I appreciate your time watching. And if you have any question at all, please don't hesitate. Reach out to me. That's what I'm here for. I'd love to help you out. Just, you know, give me a call, write me a text message, send me an email, whatever it is. But thank you so much for watching. I know it was long. Hopefully you learned something. Hopefully there was some good tips in here for you. And just have a great day. And I look forward to seeing you on the next video.